Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. We are now on Facebook Live as well. Fellow Israelites, listen to this. Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did among you through him, as you yourselves know. This man was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him. So that what was happening was that Peter is explaining to them why the events that led up to where they were. The things I want to focus on very, very quickly in this text, because we want to go right into the conversation. A key element is there in verse 1. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. They were in one accord. They were together. That we are at a time when a storm is blowing all over this country, all over this world, through the pandemic, all over this country, through the racial violence against people with brown skin in different places around this country. And so it is imperative that we come together, that we be in one place and in one mind. We don't have to agree about everything. We don't have to have unanimity about everything, but we do have to be in one accord to the extent that there are things we must do on behalf of our community to make a difference, to improve things for the people that we know, that we love, and that we're supposed to be serving. And what that means is that there was a paradigm shift. That's what Peter was talking about. Y'all, things are not the same today as they were yesterday, and they will never be the same again. We're facing that with this pandemic, that everyone wants things to go, quote, back to normal. Is in essence, what they're saying is we want things to return to the status quo. But if you've been paying attention, you know that the status quo was not sufficient for most people. The status quo meant healthcare insecurity for tens of millions of people. And that even after President Obama's administration passed the Affordable Care Act, that ever since then, people have been trying to take that away again. It means food insecurity. And we talked about that yesterday on the prayer call. 1 out of every 4 children in the United States is in a household that receives SNAP benefits, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Why? Because there's not enough food for them. They don't have access to healthy food. And so that's why, because of healthcare insecurity, food insecurity, job insecurity, the need for a living wage, all of those things are elements of our society that have been in place for a long time. And so when people say they want things to go back to normal, I don't know about you, but I'm highly offended by that. And my response to that is, frankly, hell no. That's not working for a majority of Americans. And as a result of that, we have to enable this paradigm shift. The text today, there was a paradigm shift. The Holy Spirit has come. Now the apostles filled with the Holy Spirit are going to go out and preach the good news in spite of threats to their physical safety, in spite of threats of death, because it's a new day and they weren't going back to the way things were anymore. We cannot either. And so on this day, I have asked several brothers and sisters to come and be with us for a discussion. I want to tell you first, I'll just share a little bit with you about what I asked them to do. I said we want to address the longstanding insecurity issues exposed by COVID-19, such as food insecurity, housing insecurity, healthcare insecurity, the need for a living wage, especially for the essential workers who are currently in vogue, and the over-policing and over-incarceration of people of color. What is the proper disaster response for our community in the time of pandemic? And then we also want to address the stress and outcomes of 400 years of oppression in these United States as it impacts our mental health and some of the behaviors emanating from that stress, such as domestic abuse, fratricide. They call that black on black crime, but as Sherita pointed out to me yesterday, that crime is essentially a matter of proximity. If you're going to kill somebody, you kill people that you're closer to, physically closer to. And so 83% of crimes involving white people involve white people. They don't call it white on white crime. Yet in our neighborhood, they call it black on black crime. It's just crime. It's just murder. It doesn't have a color to it. But that's some of the okie doke that folk run to throw us off from the points that really need to be understood and made in that situation. So you have an idea of where we want to go with this. And I know this is not the usual preaching of a sermon and hearing some songs or watching some dance ministry or whatever. But for such a time as this, we really, really need to be focused on our mission. And our mission that emanated from Pentecost Sunday was in chapter 2, it talks about all the people were together and had everything in common. And if anybody had need, others helped to provide for it so that nobody was left short. And we need to adopt that Pentecost mindset and move forward in a way that is a blessing to this community. And sometimes that's not going to involve singing and preaching and shouting, but it's going to involve some elbow grease, some sweat, some blood, some tears, and whatever is required to elevate all of us. We have several panelists today who are going to be with us. Give me a second just to pull that up so I can read, because I'd asked them to give us some information to introduce them. The first one you know well, son of Asbury Broadneck, Dr. Randolph Rowell is the chair of the Department of Behavioral Health Sciences at Morgan State University. He organized the Why Culture Matters Disaster Studies Project to explore the cultural implications of disasters. He's, of course, one of our lay servants. He developed the role of pastors in disasters training for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration. He conducted studies to examine African Americans and Latinos' low-income experiences with disasters in Maryland and the Black Southern Belt, implemented the Haiti Community Resilience Recovery Initiative after the earthquake in 2010, and has done a number of other things. Don't want to read all of it, but just for you to understand, that's why he's here. He's an expert in disaster preparation, and now what we're in the middle of, disaster response. Darius Stanton did not send me the email I asked for with a paragraph, so I'll let him introduce himself. Octavia Marie, she didn't send me the email I asked for, so she can introduce herself. My queen didn't either, but she lives here, so she just came downstairs and printed something out. I want to read that very quickly. Dr. Sherita Gaskins-Tillett is a Baltimore native. She is a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist who has spent a significant portion of her career providing care to underserved women. She has special interests in maternal mortality and ending health disparities. She's currently serving as the Wellness and Missions Board, on the Wellness and Missions Board in the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and is helping to lead the conference's Abundant Health Initiative. She has discerned that her personal mission is to help others to recognize the connection between our physical health and our spiritual and emotional health. And she seeks to inspire and empower fellow Christians to achieve whole life wellness, which is mind, body, and spirit. Darius and Octavia Marie, if you all would introduce yourselves and just let us know how the heart of the community beats in you and why you do what you do.
I just realized, first of all, good morning. I should let ladies go first. If you so choose, but I will definitely jump in there. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Darius Stanton. I am a lifelong Marylander with a short stint of living in Buffalo, New York. But I am a husband and a father. I'm the president, CEO of the Stanton Group, a business management consulting firm. I'm a graduate of the Lincoln University with a master's in human services administration. I'm the chair of the Wiley H. Bates Leadership Academy and Summer Basketball League, and the vice president of the Maryland State Legislative Black Caucus Foundation. Also the host of the Peace in the Morning Show, which is a weekly broadcast on Facebook and YouTube, and a daily broadcast here in Prince George's County on Verizon and Comcast television called Good News Bowie. Both of those shows are focused on highlighting assets and strengths in our communities versus crying, complaining, and whining about what's going on, but showing people who are actually doing those things. It's a joy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, I guess I'm last. So my name is Octavia Brown. I am a social worker. I got my undergrad, my BSW, my bachelor's in social work from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, otherwise UMBC. I got my master's from University of Maryland, Baltimore. I am licensed. I work. I use my social work degree to the fullest extent. I'll say that. I work as a mental health therapist. That's my full-time gig. I work in low-income and urban communities. I am very dedicated to low-income and urban communities. I have experienced in working in domestic violence and sexual assault. I have worked for Child Protective Services. And then I also am in political social work. My husband and I run a PAC called the Annapolis Coalition of Black Progressives, where we work very diligently to get education out on policy and the importance of voting. And we work very hard to keep progressive Black elected officials in office, while also working very hard to get Black candidates who are progressive elected into office, and giving those opportunities in the communities to start their career in politics. So that's me.
All right, thank you very much. We're glad to have all of you. There is one other person, a young person that we had invited to participate this morning. He is actually familiar to the Broadneck Peninsula. Harold Moe Lloyd, born and raised in Annapolis, Broadneck High School class of 2016, and just graduated this spring from Frostburg State University with a major in law and society. He's the creator of Superior Future, a nonprofit organization located in Maryland that emphasizes education, opportunity, and scholarship with youth in low-income neighborhoods. So hopefully Harold will be joining us. He has the credentials. I understand that I just got a text from Kia Johnson that some people are having a hard time signing in. I don't quite understand why that is. And so many people are checking us out on Facebook Live instead. Kia, for those of you on Facebook, will post the links as far as the offering for the week. We're not going to be spending time focusing on that either. One thing I want to say before we get into the meat of this, with respect to Octavia, I knew that Octavia was somebody I wanted to work with when there was one of these meetings that we had, Darius. You know how these meetings go, and people just talk and talk and talk. I think there were emails flying back and forth, and after a while it was just, nonsense. And shortly afterward, an email comes from Octavia. We've decided we're not going to participate in this. And, they've gone on to do their thing. I wasn't mad at them, and I knew then. So those are some folk I need to connect with, because, we talk things to death long enough. So the first part of this discussion, what I'd like to do is focus on the issue that has kind of been removed from much of the media focus for the last several days. And after the murder of George Floyd, the media is focusing on that, and more so, not so much on his death, but on the uprisings that have taken place as a result of his death. But there is still a global pandemic going on, where over 100,000 people in the United States of America have died, and several 100,000 people around the world have died. The United States represents almost 1 out of every 3 people who have died, and about almost 1 in 3 infections in the world, about 30% of the infections in the world. And given that we are 4% of the population in the world, that's troubling. Now, we know we're not getting completely accurate numbers from Russia and from China, and so probably our numbers will go down some as more truth-telling takes place or things are exposed over time. But be that as it may, the United States has been largely affected by this COVID virus, the coronavirus. And in addition to that, as we have heard a great deal, our communities, brown people, African Americans, people of the African diaspora, and Latinos have been affected disproportionately to our numbers in the population. It is affecting seniors, who many have compromised immune systems and health issues, but it is also affecting people who have comorbidities. Now, Sherita and I were talking about this yesterday, and she mentioned something about comorbidities that I'll let her touch on. But apparently a lot of those comorbidities, in addition to diabetes, high blood pressure, whatever, that a lot of it is undergirded by a foundation of stress that we live with. So Dr. Sherita, why don't you start with that, and also what you were sharing about women who had come from Africa or the Caribbean, how they are when they get here, and how things are in their family a generation later.
Good morning. First, I want to address the COVID situation, and just to talk a little bit about some of the disparities. I'm sure in the media that you all have heard that African American communities and other communities of color are being impacted more significantly by this virus than other communities. Here in the United States, African Americans are 3 times more likely to contract the COVID-19 and 6 times more likely to die from COVID-19. So this is a very significant health crisis. It's concerning to me as a physician also that people don't seem to be taking this as seriously at this point as they should. And some people are speculating that part of that is the fact that it is impacting communities of color disproportionately. Therefore, it is not as significant a health issue. But we have to keep it before our communities at all times to be aware of what we should do in terms of social distancing and wearing our mask and hand hygiene and all of those things. So we don't want, I know that communities are beginning to open up, but we don't want to be deceived by that opening into thinking that we are safe and that things can return to quote unquote normal. So let's start with that. And then as Pastor alluded to, there are, when they control for certain risk factors. So, we talked about the comorbidities, things that predispose people to contracting to the virus. So compromised immune systems, high blood pressure, diabetes, all of those kinds of things. When they control for those factors, just in general, not specifically with COVID-19, but in general, when they control for all of those factors, they like to say that African American people, that there's something genetically different about us, that there's something inside of us that makes us predisposed to these things. Or they like to blame us, personally on an individual level, that we don't have restraint, we don't eat the right things, we don't do the right things, and that's why we have these problems. But they have actually done studies that show that at the very root of these disparities is racism and the chronic stress of living in the United States of America. With regard to maternal mortality specifically, or maternal morbidity, I would say more so than mortality specifically, that let's take preterm birth. So preterm delivery is more common in the African American community. And the speculation had been that there was something different, inherently different about African American women, that there's some kind of bacteria or something in our bodies that cause us to go into preterm labor more than other populations. But what they have looked at is women who come from the Caribbean, women who come from Africa. They don't have the same rate of preterm delivery as women who are here, who have been born here in the United States. But the offspring of those women who were born here and raised here, end up having the same background preterm labor rate as women who have been here. Because again, the women who were born here, their offspring live with the chronic trauma of racism. It's a chronic stress, and stress is very harmful to the body.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Just to have to lay some of that foundation. And since we are talking about some of the physical manifestations, let's now hear from Octavia Marie, who has been knee deep in community in Baltimore and now in Anne Arundel County for a while as a social worker, community activist, et cetera. And you, when we spoke yesterday, you were talking some about the psychological trauma, domestic violence, and other things that are actually being magnified in our community during this time of pandemic. You want to talk some about that?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Okay, so let's start. I just want to start off by talking about the psychological effects of racial trauma just in general. And because I think that's important to understand what racism, what the systematic racism does to the people who endure it, how that affects us. You know, we heard about how it affects us physically, but really how that affects us mentally. And I think that the best way to really describe that is, number one, to talk about what trauma is itself. And I want to use a book by Dr. Joy DeGruy, who she wrote a book on post-traumatic slave syndrome. And I really love her definition of trauma. And I want to really talk about what post-traumatic slave syndrome is. And so the post-traumatic slave syndrome is not a disorder that is recognized in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that we use as clinicians to make mental health diagnoses, but it is very real. It is very, very real. And so her diagnosis that she has created, called post-traumatic slave syndrome, is a spin-off for Black people of what post-traumatic stress disorder is, which is PTSD. And so PTSD is a disorder that is brought on by trauma. And I'm going to read you the definition of trauma. The Black version definition of trauma that's Dr. Joy DeGruy talked about in this book. But trauma, the general definition of it is anything that has happened to you to no fault of your own, something that you were a victim of, that has caused a tremendous impact on your life, that has very much impacted you. And at times when we experience trauma, sometimes the consequences of that trauma is so severe that one might develop what is called post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress disorder has a number of symptoms, including high anxiety, flashbacks, nightmares, you know, to whatever it is that event has, whatever event that happened, you are suffering greatly from that event. It's changed the way that you see yourself. It's changed the way that you see the world. The world is no longer looked at as a safe place for you, but a place that you need to be afraid of. And so even when we look at the definition of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is absolutely recognized in the DSM as a mental health disorder, one can only imagine what that looks like for Black people who were born one of slavery's children. We are all born slavery's children because we were brought to this country under an enslaved state. And so that means that we have endured centuries of not just trauma, but repetitive and complex trauma. And so I want to read the definition from Dr. Joy DeGruy, her definition of trauma and how it relates to people of color. So she says, so what is trauma? Trauma is an injury caused by an outside, usually violent force, event, or experience. She says that we can experience this injury physically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. She says that traumas can upset our equilibrium and well-being. If a trauma is severe enough, it can distort our attitudes and beliefs. Such distortions often result in dysfunctional behaviors, which can in turn produce unwanted consequences. Since even one traumatic experience can result in distorted attitudes, just one, dysfunctional behaviors and unwanted consequences, this pattern is magnified exponentially when a person repeatedly experiences severe trauma, and it is much worse when the traumas are caused by human beings. Recent research in the field of epigenetics is the study of how the environment influences and changes our gene structures. So it says recent research in the field of epigenetics has revealed that trauma can actually impact an individual's DNA, and the manifestation of the traumas experienced by prior generations can be passed along genetically to future offspring. And that means that I can give my unborn baby the effects of trauma, because the trauma that we experience is so powerful that it actually impacts our DNA and changes our gene structures, that we can actually genetically pass that trauma down to our unborn children.
Octavia, what you're saying then is that it's not just in our heads.
No, it's absolutely not in our heads.
No, I'm saying because that is sometimes what we hear. It's like, well, you all should just get over it. You know, slavery was back then. This is now, as if now is so great. But it's in your head. Clearly, it's in the genes, as both the first two panelists have said, is not in your head.
Absolutely. It's not. This is science. This is science. This is proven. And so she also goes on to say that the enslavement experience was one of continual violent attacks on body, mind, and spirit. She says men, women, and children were traumatized throughout their lives, and the violent attacks during slavery persisted long after emancipation. In the face of these injuries, those traumatized adapted their attitudes and behaviors in order to simply survive. And these adaptations continue to manifest today. And so in her definition of post-traumatic slave syndrome, I want to just focus on the top 3 symptoms of that and how that relates to Black people. And so being a victim of slavery, which we are all victims of slavery, because we talked about how trauma is passed down genetically. So that means that we are all slavery's children, and that we are all impacted by slavery, even though we were not born into slavery. And so those 3 top symptoms are vacant esteem, ever-present anger, and racist socialization. And so when we look at vacant esteem, we see the impact of not only slavery, but let's really think about this. We've never really been 100% free. You know what I'm saying? So you have the period of slavery, and then you have the emancipation, but right after the emancipation comes Jim Crow, Black Code, and then you have the lynchings and the violence against us. And then you have, after that, even in the era that we are in now, is the era of mass incarceration and police brutality. And systematic racism never went away. And so we are continually experiencing complex trauma that has a huge effect on the way that we feel about ourselves, our self-esteem, and our self-confidence. And we stay in survival mode. That absolutely affects our behavior. And then we have ever-present anger. We're angry. And we have every right to be. And so when you see the riots that are occurring, which, by the way, let me make very clear, are not just people of color who are out here rioting, but when you see the riots that are occurring, when you see the way that we conduct ourselves, when you see the violence within our community, we're angry. We are very angry, and rightfully so. And then you think about the way that we're socialized in a racist society. So we are socialized to believe that we are beneath and never above, that we are inferior. And all of those things absolutely affects us majorly psychologically, but in our behavior, because the way that mental health manifests itself is through our behavior. So when you see individuals who behave a certain way, and we're wondering, well, why do they behave like this way? Or why are they so angry? These are all a result of the systematic racism that we are continually subjected to every single day, and from all of those traumas that happened during slavery that we are continually affected by today. And so when you see domestic violence and sexual assault and those things that happen in our community, those just don't happen because we're born, we're just Black and we want to do those things. These are the absolute effects of trauma, of complex trauma that happen to us every single day.
And there's some comments I want to make with respect to the uprising, but we'll deal with that more in the second segment. Dr. Rowell, you have spent a lot of your time in recent years addressing disaster preparedness. But as you said yesterday in our conversation, at this point, we're really talking about disaster response because we're in the middle of it. So if you would talk about it with respect to the coronavirus right now, and then we're going to get to some of the community trauma, the post-traumatic stress, et cetera, in the next part of the conversation.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and to God be the glory. I'm listening to the conversation and seeing my panelists and Darius with gray hair. Welcome to the club. and Octavia.
Darius, he's just jealous because you still have hair. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. But, the conversation from Dr. Tillett and Octavia, just to summarize it, place matters and history matters. And the only reason perhaps that we are able to deal with all of this trauma that was just so eloquently described is because our resilience is also in our genes. So resilience is that ability to bounce back, but it's hard to bounce back when the foot is on your neck. And so bouncing back means bouncing back to something better, which has everything to do with disasters. Disasters is about how do we overcome this disease, this hurricane, this flood. And so what I'd like to say, particularly to the disaster framework, is that this is nothing new. The Bible speaks of disasters in numerous, in fact, it says 125 times the term pestilence and plagues are mentioned in the Bible. These are things that have happened for years in terms of how people deal with them. And I'll just give you, if you don't mind, Pastor, I'll just read one scripture about this that says in Exodus 9, 1-3, it said, "Let my people go to speak to him. Thus said the Lord." And when Moses spoke to the people, he said, "For if you refuse to let them go," he told the Pharaoh, "and continue to hold them, behold, the hand of the Lord will come in a very severe pestilence," meaning diseases and plagues. We also see in Matthew 24, 3-8, where it was said that, "And you will hear wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all of these things must come to pass. But the end is not near. For nation will rise up against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in various places." So these things are not new at all to us in the Bible. And when we look at disasters, and I'd like to extend the conversation that we're having in terms of what's going on in the communities right now, disasters is more than natural and man-made disasters. Our communities, many of our communities are in a disastrous state and therefore need some type of disaster intervention. So what does it mean in terms of how does the government set itself structure up to deal with disasters? Well, first there's mitigation. Mitigation is the period where you might tie your house down or do something to your house before a tornado comes. Mitigation in the case of coronavirus means that you would stockpile equipment, respiratory equipment, stockpile all kinds of things, drugs and medications that a hospital or healthcare facility might need should there be a pandemic. Preparedness is something that also is spoken in the Bible. In Genesis 41, 47-49, remember when Joseph had interpreted the dream of a Pharaoh, and Joseph was in 30 years old when he entered this position. And during the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly, and he gathered up all the food of these 7 years. In other words, he was preparing for this famine that was coming. And so for us, preparedness means, you've heard in disasters, 3-day supply of food, these kind of things. But in the case of the pandemic, did we have a supply of masks in our home? Did we have some sanitizers in our home? Did the government have all the things in terms of preparedness, in terms of a pandemic influenza plan? And we've had plans for years in the government, as far back as early 2000, but also it was updated in the year 2017. So this is the plan is what tells us how we should deal with this disaster once it comes. And so preparedness, and then after preparedness, after we're supposed to be ready for it, and we weren't, then comes response. So the response that we're in right now for Corona is beyond a hurricane. A hurricane hits, and then they get into recovery very quickly, because it generally, most often, does not come back unless the eye of the storm floats back to destination. And in the case of a coronavirus, it's like a hurricane that's been going on for 4 months, now 2 months, and it's not finished yet. So we haven't even really gotten into the recovery phase. We're still talking about masks and the things we need to get through to save lives. So in that regard, recovery is something we should have our mind on. Recovery is all the things about these jobs, and where are our children, our college students and high school students going to work this summer? Where are they? How will this change and restructure their whole lives? We're talking about trauma on top of trauma, as Sister Octavia Brown said. We're talking about existing trauma, more trauma. And so the stress that will be upon us, I think we're seeing that stress is coming out in millions of people. And the stress is not just in people of color. Other folks feel this stress too. And so we must be mindful of the mental health needs that's going to come about. How do we help our children get through this period of being home to school? How do we get them into young adults and being home, living with their parents and siblings after they've been on their own for 3 or 4 years? These are the things that will be coming up in the future. And then also during this phase, it's a very critical piece called risk communication. How do we communicate the things that people should know to be safe? And one of the things we've learned in some of the research I've done is that it must come from a trusted source. So what are we seeing today? We're seeing mixed messages coming from the federal government, and then you hear another message coming from the state. And I just want to add one last point before I finish. All disasters are local. All disasters are local. Now, what does that mean? The president says we're in a state of emergency. That means all the resources of the feds are now available to any state. The state governor says we're in a state of emergency. All the resources of a state are now available to the city of Annapolis or any jurisdiction. So the key thing is that the decisions are made at the local level. If I had a hurricane hit my community, why should you shut down your community and you're 5-10 miles away and it did not hit your community? That's why when the president says, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, because it's all local. That's why those decisions are being made at the local level. And much of what he's saying is just, he's just blowing smoke in our ears, or whatever the term is. But we need to
Okie doke is the word you're looking for.
The okie doke worked for me. But again, the structure's always been in place, and it's been in place for a number of years. It's law and it's legislation. It's just how it's being implemented. So in response phase, again, risk communication, what we need to be thinking about in the recovery phase: mental health, more stress, jobs, because all these things we call social and structural determinants of health. The structural determinants that Octavia laid out says that this redlining and all of these policies that kept us and hyper segregated people in a certain part of the community, and that part of the community did not get healthcare resources, did not get jobs and all these other opportunities, and therefore the stressors increased and increased, and so therefore we end up being more stressed, and stress, as Dr. Tillett said, is directly linked to our health. So one of the things, and I'll end it by saying, one of the things that the faith-based community is doing. And thanks to the way God has led Reverend Tillett, I said Dr. Tillett, I'm talking about Reverend Tillett, is we meet, the church comes together every day at noon. This is a stress reduction effort. This is what recovery is all about. We need to continue these kind of things because there's going to be a number of groups, and I think we need to figure out how to reduce that stress among some of our young people, because they are really stressed and they're in a period of total uncertainty because we're dealing with a disease that no one knows about. They don't know when it's going to stop. They don't know when it's going to come back. They don't even have a vaccination for it. So we're in this for another long period of time, at least minimally a year, because this is something that we don't know anything about. But what we do know is that disasters have always affected people of color worse than other groups. Look at Katrina. Look at how it was affected and how the government dealt with that. Look at all these other disasters where these groups were affected, and the research says in the response phase and in the recovery phase. So we need to keep our ears open and mindset on the recovery phase and what we're going to do to deal with that. We need to focus on staying alive right now, but we still need to have our eye on the next step, and that is recovery, and continue to do the things that we're doing in the name of Jesus Christ.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I'm going to be asking you all for a couple of prescriptions, recommendations for how you think we can get over the hump here. I'm sure Dr. Gaskins, one of the things she's going to say is stay your hips home until the curve has actually flattened, because due to economic pressures, they have started to release quarantine status, even though the numbers have not dropped to the levels that they said they wanted them to drop before they would open up the economy. And I think yesterday in conversation, Dr. Sherita said, if everybody would just stay home for a month, then everyone who is infected, to the point where it would be either affecting their health or is transmissible, we know. And then we could start releasing, but it's like we have lacked the discipline, and therefore we're continuing to be in this. But I'm going to be looking for some prescriptions from you all, things that we can do as individuals, and then things that we can do as a community, as a congregation. Part of the disaster response, I think, needs to be caring for some of the needs that are maybe pushed up to the side some. In this instance, as we're coming towards summer, and we've already had a couple of murders, young people killing other young people. We're going to get to that more in the second segment, the fratricide. But that Brother Darius had talked, and he introduced himself, talked about the summer academy that they've had in the past. And I participated some with that a couple of years ago. I don't know if that's even something we're going to be able to do this year, and if so, what the limitations will be. But you can't, it's frustrating. Doctor would say we need to stay home until we're, cleared, or they've got a vaccine or something. But I know from the 7-year-old in my house, she is tired of being in this house, not being around any other young people, looking at us. She wants to be around some kids and be able to do some things. I get that. So Darius, and then Moe is also here, Harold Moe Lloyd, and he has he just graduated, this month from Frostburg State University. He has established Superior Future, which is a nonprofit organization to emphasize education, opportunity, and scholarship for youth in low-income neighborhoods. So Darius and Moe, talk to us. What can we do to try and relieve some of that pressure and stress in our communities in this time frame?
Go ahead, Brother Moe.
First, let me say, how's everyone doing today? I know I'm a little late, technical difficulties, but I'm here. So with my nonprofit, one of the things that we're trying to do now, we're trying to transition all of our programs over to like a virtual setting. And we're trying to make sure that all the kids that we work with has a Chromebook or any type of laptop that we can connect with them. But, you know, we always face this issue that, like, for example, I know that the COVID is horrible. Many people are dying, but even though it exposed us to a new virus, it also exposed us to the systematic racism that a lot of these kids face on a daily basis. So, for example, I know a lot of kids didn't have laptops, nor did they have Wi-Fi. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to like put a new curriculum into our programs, whereas though we can help these kids. We know that it's not going to be as powerful as a regular educational institution because we don't have all the tools and all the people to help us, but we're trying to give them new science projects. So we're really big on STEM right now. Also, we're trying to just give them basic history lessons, art projects. We're trying to keep them active in the house because I know when I was a kid, summer came around and someone told me that you should stay in the house during the summer because we had to social distance. I would be going crazy because I just spent, I believe it's 8 to 9 months in school, and you're telling me my only 3 months of freedom, I had to stay in the house. I know I'm gonna go crazy. So we understood that, and we're trying to help the kids to be cool, calm, and collective in the house. So we're just trying to find solutions to where as though we can use this pandemic to help benefit us so we could benefit the kids. So I think right now we're ready to face a dramatic change in the world. Like we're ready to see how powerful technology really is. So I think that's the main focus of our change right now is how we're going to use technology to our advantage because health and safety is first, regardless of how we want to do anything. It's not like we don't want to be out there face to face with these kids, but if I was to get exposed to the virus and Lord God forbid, and I passed away, I'm no use to those kids anymore. So we're trying to take cautious to that first, you know, health and safety. And then we're trying to figure out how we can help each and every one of these kids who are going through this crazy time right now, because we all know that it's crazy. So it's up to us right now, you know, to be calm, level-headed and trying to help everybody because like if we're all going crazy, then there's no help. It's useless. So we're big on that right now. So
we're all going crazy. That's what you call a formula for disaster. And one of the things that Moe referenced with the Chromebooks, and you all remember I sent out an email a couple of weeks ago asking, had all of your children, grandchildren received Chromebooks? And in a couple of responses I got, they had not. That problem has since been rectified. But Chromebooks are only helpful or fully helpful if there are people in the house who have enough familiarity to work with you to get that done. And so in addition to the achievement gap, which my concern is that unless we really step up with some of the things Moe's talking about and the things Darius is going to talk about, the achievement gap will become an achievement canyon by September because our young people then will have not been in school since March. Then there'll be the summer, and then they're going to go to another grade with a higher level of instruction without proper undergirding. And so I think it's going to be critical that we do whatever we can using cyber technology to connect with them to help households where there's maybe not as much tech savvy as the young people might need, because there's also a technology gap. And we talked about that with the Dr. Arlotto and his team, that even if they have Chromebooks, if they don't have Wi-Fi, you know, sometimes people's Wi-Fi, they use their phone as a hotspot. Well, that's not going to be consistent enough or fast enough to help you do what you need to do. So there are a number of challenges that we're having that we're looking for some solutions for. And that's why I asked you all last week if there are any of you in the congregation, in the community, if those of you out on Facebook Live who have some facility in a particular area of academics, whether it's English, math, history, geography, whatever, that you could volunteer your time to be a cyber tutor, where you might have a small group of people and or one-on-one to, again, help close the gap so that it doesn't become a canyon. Brother Darius. And there's also a question for you in the chat, but that'll be more toward the second part of the conversation. I just wanted you to know that.
Yeah, I saw that. Thank you. So again, good morning, peace and love. I thank God for the opportunity to be here. All of our good and righteous ancestors that have allowed us and breathe breath into our bodies. Thank you, Pastor Tillett, as Randy said, for Dr. Rowell, I should say, for your leadership, not only keeping contact with your parishioners every day by allowing them to feel a part of something, that they have a sense of belonging, which is so important as we are isolated and as Dr. Tillett talked about the need for us to stay in place. I also want to just briefly thank Dr. Rowell. I always do this publicly because I am who I am, because of the opportunities and the doors that he opened for me. Octavia Brown, another sister who is a reason for me being here, and my cousin who just recently graduated from Frostburg State University, Moe Lloyd. I'm so proud of him and the work that he's doing and the leadership and the example and the model that he represents for our community. He is definitely the present, not future leadership. He is leading now. So I want to start with this. First and foremost, I want to make sure everybody gets pad and pencil out because Dr. Brown, I'm gonna call her Octavia Brown, gave a dissertation this morning, and you should have had your notebook out, you know, and to have her and Dr. Tillett on the line is powerful. So you need to, and Dr. Rowell. So these are not just locals, but these are experts that can rival with anybody. And she provided some very serious information. So get your notebooks out and take notes and share this with your family. Share this on, you know, the platforms. We always share negative things. A couple hashtags for you: push positive news and be bold for good. Push positive news and be bold for good. We get in a cycle of pushing a whole lot of other stuff on social media. Let's really use social media for good and be bold for good. You know, we're working in a situation where for 24/7, 365 days a year, people are paid to create havoc on the world. And so we need to have the same level of zeal and energy and effort to push good. We can't just lay in the bed on Saturday morning. We got to get up and do the work. We can't just lay back because it's Sunday, we're gonna relax. We can relax when our people are free and we are able to make sure that we are okay and that everybody can eat. Everybody is feeling good. We can't just take off. You know, we do need to take respite and make sure we are safe, right? But we need to make sure that we are out here pushing for good 24/7, 365. Where I want to start is, it starts at home. It starts at home. We have to stay home, as Dr. Tillett said. And as we do that and come back into the community, you know, we need to do that very slowly because of the fact that when we stay at home, first and foremost, our immune system starts to relax itself because we're not constantly engaged with folks. And so when you come right back out, that's why you can hear them talk about, well, they're sure there's going to be a second outburst. Well, of course it would be. If you kept people home for 90 days and their immune systems diminish, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Tillett, but if your immune system diminishes or gets relaxed, and then you go back out and now you're involved and engaged with a whole lot of people that you have not been engaged with, your body's not used to that, you know, that's going to have an impact on you. Also, be mindful of the fact that alcohol is a terrible, terrible, terrible substance, right? It can be used for good, but the majority of what alcohol is used for in our country, and remember, they left alcohol stores open. And I understand the detox, the medical detox process with regard to what happens to folks who are addicted to alcohol and what the body goes through, that violent process that happens to the human body. But I also want to remind people that alcohol is responsible for between 40 and 60% of suicides, of domestic violence, of sexual assault, of homicide, all these things that impact our communities. And so we were able to buy alcohol. Pennsylvania was the only state, I believe, that completely shut alcohol down, and people left there to come to Maryland to buy alcohol. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is because there's something else that impacts us. It's called alcohol fetal syndrome. We talk about crack babies, but we don't talk about alcohol fetal syndrome. And if you think about where the most violence takes place in our society, the most violence takes place in our society where you have a concentration of alcohol, liquor stores, distributions. You can have 2 and 3 liquor stores on one block, right? And then if you look at communities have very little violence, the study was done in 2009. The Baltimore City Health Department did a study on youth violence, and it clearly illustrated wherever you saw gunshots and homicides, you saw liquor stores overlaid right on top of that. This is not just a statewide issue. It's not a national, it's international. Research has been done to dictate how that transpires. The reason why I'm sharing that is because at home, we have to prepare ourselves. You heard Dr. Rowell talk about emergency preparedness. So there's some things that we have to do at home to deal with COVID-19. First and foremost, you have a lot of information coming at you. So I had the pleasure of being able to teach sociology this year at Anne Arundel Community College. Thank you, Dr. Denny, for helping me to make that come to fruition, as well as Vicki Gibson and a few other folks, but Judge Gibson. But one of the things that we did with our class once COVID-19 started was we redirected the whole class to start a research project. And it was around 8 different elements that focused on that it was impacted or somewhat was dealing with it in our society today around COVID-19. The first was the statistics, really be able to understand the statistics from a number of sources, not just Johns Hopkins, not just the World Health Organization, but really look across the board so you can really get a true sense of the numbers, because we were getting so bombarded and my students were seeing all of these deaths and all these, Dr. Rowell talked about the state had one message, the federal government had another. Inside the federal government, right on the same platform, you had 3 different messages coming from 3 different people. So who do you listen to? So that can be very overwhelming for all of us, not just our children. Then you get stuck on television and the news. So the first thing was to look at the numbers. The second thing is, let's look at the past pandemics. There have been past pandemics before. What are those other pandemics? What were the numbers? So you can get a sense of that. The third was 5G. What does 5G have to do with this? You heard the conspiracy theories that 5G was causing some of this. This was all an attempt to be able to install 5G. How dangerous is it? Where is it being installed was number 4. Where is there correlation? And what was found by this class was that there is a correlation between 5G and what's happening, but not causation. And what that basically means is that the correlation between 5G and the coronavirus and COVID-19 is that it's in large populated areas, okay, which makes sense because viruses transmit through people. That's one of the reasons why it's the same. They did not necessarily see the causation, but when you look at what transpires with regard to your long-term health effects from radiation and extensive radiation, it can be some of the same symptoms. The next piece is what's happening financially around the world. The United States had a 2.4 on its way to a $6 to $8 billion, trillion stimulus package. Yet Americans, the everyday American, and if you had to make less than $75,000 a year or 150, which one was it? Either way, you only got $1,200, but corporations like the Los Angeles Lakers got bailout money, right? So that's just an example of one instance, but just all of the financial markets, what's happening with gold, what's happening with oil. Then look at the conflicts around the world. Where are their conflicts? What are they rooted in? What's happening with regard to conflicts in Mexico? Do you know how many people are being killed right now every day in the country of Mexico? Understand the dynamics of that and how that plays out in terms of what's happening in America. Brazil, the second largest population of African people on the planet, are dying with overwhelming numbers, right, to COVID-19. Then the next piece is, what are the successes? What are the good things that happen as a result of being home with your family? In my neighborhood, I saw people I never even saw before. I seen children in the middle of the day walking with their parents, which they would never have had the opportunity to do because my wife and I had children young, we were at work. Thank God we had family and a good place to keep our children, but we were at work till 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the evening, taking care of raising money to raise a family. And so to be able to spend that quality time is very important. We've prayed more. This is one thing I want you to write this down. We prayed more. So we came up with something at home to work out more than we eat. That means physical activity, work out more than we eat. We work out together as a family. We ride bike, running, jogging, calisthenics, all right? Secondly, in addition to that, pray and meditate more than we watch television and social media. So if you haven't got your prayers in and you haven't done your meditation for the day, then don't get on social media and television. Start to discipline yourself.
Again. Wow. Yeah.
Start to discipline yourself so that these things become habit. So the new normal for us is a new heaven here on earth and not the H-E-L-L that we lived in before, right? And so those two things, make sure that you work out more than you eat and pray and meditate more than you watch television and social media. So binge on working out. Get that blood working, because what's happening to us is we're not in shape. We're out of shape, right? We got high blood pressure, sugar, diabetes, so all those things, right? So the next piece was, then we looked at after we looked at successes, we looked at money. We also looked at vaccinations. There's two major primary schools of thoughts with regard to vaccinations. There's a school of thought that vaccinations are good, help reduce and minimize disease. There's another school of thought that says vaccinations for African people, Black people across the globe has been a disaster, right? And so you really have to understand the dynamics of that. What does that mean? How do we adjust? What is the chemical makeup? It takes 8 to 10 years to come up with a vaccination. In this case, we're talking about it happening in a year, in less than 18 months. So just understand the dynamics of that. Do your homework. Once you're able to categorize and analyze the data, it releases the stress because you're in control of the information. The information is not being hurled at you and you're just trying to catch it, dodge it, till you're so overwhelmed. Everybody in the house is stressed. These things will allow you to be able to do it because you're using you're teaching your children how to be critical thinkers, right? So when they get outside on the street, somebody's going to do something that they know could potentially send them to jail or lock them up, they're gonna go the other way. Do you understand? They will start to use critical thinking skills. The last thing that I want to share with regard to just COVID-19 is the greatest prevention, and there's a brother out of DC whose name escaped me at the moment, but I'll remember, who said the greatest prevention right now for COVID-19 is nutrition. Making sure that we're eating properly. Now, we got to stay home and safe, right? So, of course, wash your hands. If you learn that, you're supposed to learn that when you was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? But wash your hands consistently. Stay home as much as possible and out of, and then keep your mask. Don't wear your mask in the car. Don't wear it when there's nobody else in the car and you breathe. That doesn't make sense. But when you're out in the public and you're interacting with people, you want to be able to protect yourself. But beyond that, let's make sure that we're eating properly. So we definitely have to eat more fruits and vegetables. We definitely have to have green foods, things that put oxygen in the body. We have to have ginger at home. So you need to get your emergency preparedness kit, get ginger. I'm gonna put these things in the chat already. I'll hit send and it should go. Ginger, golden seal kills infection as well as ginger does. Garlic and onion, vitamin C. Drink as much alkaline water as possible. How do you alkaline your water? Add lemon or celery. And celery to the water. Celery absorbs the acid and it raises the pH balance in the water, right? In addition to alkaline water, also sea moss. Drink sea moss. Sea moss has 92 of 102 of the body's needed nutrients, as well as moringa seeds also have 92 of the 102 needed nutrients that the body needs, right? So think about that, 92 of 102. So sea moss should be a part of your diet. You can eat it raw or you can put it in a smoothie, but sea moss should also be a part of that. Charcoal. Charcoal helps to deal and take the magnetic radiation out of the body. So it helps to diffuse radiation and a host of other things. When you go to the hospital and they have a toxic overdose, I believe it's charcoal that they use to help pump the stomach. So charcoal is very powerful and can help us to prevent. So gargling apple cider vinegar every day is something else you should be doing every time you come indoors. If you do it every day, gargling, then it kills the virus in the throat, any other bacteria, but also it helps to promote healthy, good intestinal health. So make sure that you're gargling, and if you're doing it every day, you won't forget to do it when you come in from outside because it's a habit form. So everything that I talked about, really, it starts at home. Educate your children at home, help them to regulate what it is that they're thinking and doing at home so that they're prepared. And without question, there's a list of things we should be also having in our homes and always dealing with so that we can make sure that we're safe and protected. And if we have to stay in the house for another 30 days, we have those things. Thank you.
Another 30 days or perhaps more. Dr. Gaskins, is there anything you want to say about vaccines before we go on? We've had these conversations before as well, so I wanted to let her say what she needs to say.
Well, not vaccines specifically. This particular vaccine gives me some unrest just because of the rapid nature that the rapid way that they're going about developing it. It's not going to be, there's no way that they can develop it, properly test it, and know that it's safe in such a short period of time. And so that certainly gives me pause. That being said, I don't exactly know what the alternative is, because in order for us to be able to open back up as a society, there does have to be some kind of vaccine, or either a vaccine has to happen, or there has to be an eradication of the virus, one or the other, in order for us to go, be able to be in a free society again. So all that to say, me personally, I'm not excited to be one of the first people to get a vaccine if they come up with one. So I will start with that. As a healthcare worker, I will be faced with needing to make that decision, though, because during the flu season, flu vaccine is a condition of our employment. If we don't have the flu vaccine, we cannot work. I strongly suspect that will also come to pass with this vaccine. But what I would recommend is that you give it a little time and see what happens with the first cohort of people who get the vaccine, and how it impacts you. The other thing I do want to say about vaccines, though, in general, I believe that vaccines are safe. They have eradicated things that used to be existent in the population that are no longer seen. Now, again, there's always a caveat, because you don't know, Brother Darius talked about the vaccines in certain African populations and other things. We don't necessarily know that the vaccines that they're getting are the same vaccines that are being given in other places. They inject something in you, and you have to trust that it's the thing that they say they're injecting. And we all as a community know that, sometimes they like to do experiments on populations without their consent or their knowledge. So, some of those adverse effects that we see can certainly be a byproduct of those types of experiments.
Okay, all right, thank
Pastor
you.
Tillett, thank you, Dr. Tillett, for that. And I can't tell you how much it means to have somebody that you know and trust, to be able to share information. And that's one of the things that I also want to suggest is really, pay attention to people who that you trust, and not only that you know and trust, but that people that do their homework and their research. And I'm not just saying, it just so happens that the folks here have degrees, everyone here is degreed, but degrees don't make it. So that's not it. You have to do something with that information, and you have to go beyond what you're taught. You have to do research. And that's why I said, so really, listen to people who study and can give you some sites, some sources, and tell you why I think this, not just I think this, or because I'm a charismatic leader and we just go repeat what somebody else said. Go do the homework, check behind everything that we say, Google it, look it up, do your research. But what I wanted to touch base on really quick.
Critical thinking, you were talking about that earlier, critical thinking.
Right, and it's very important, and that's towards the Leadership Academy. I'm so proud and thankful for Harold Lloyd and Dee Ward for starting the virtual after-school program and tutoring. And so, as Mr. Pastor Tillett talked about, we have been, now this will be our 6th summer, doing the Wiley H. Bates Leadership Academy and Summer Basketball League. And of course, they're not allowing summer basketball to take place as a group sport. And so right now we're working on 2 things. One, a virtual summer camp that would be a leadership camp to teach critical thinking skills, to do music and arts, to learn how to DJ through math and science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, a program called Math Through Music, where you actually have a DJ kit and you learn how to start a business, how to run a marketing plan, how to do the numbers, you manage a budget, how to forecast, all of those things, as well as learn all of the variables that are involved in music and science and that impact DJing as a career. But in addition to that, we want to be able to also focus on helping young people deal with what we're dealing with, because mental health is a significant challenge. We did a show this past Friday, and every one of the women, it was this 5-part series called How Do We Love Ourselves, around mental health and loving ourselves. And so we're going to be spending a great deal of time on that. One of the things we are working to do is create a skills league. So instead of it being a 5-on-5 basketball league, we'd be able to do a skills league. And the skills league would basically, you still have a team and 3 or 4 people would play against each other, but in skills, right? So dribbling, shooting, 3-pointers, foul shots, things of that nature. And then you'd accumulate a score and then you go on. And so that would be, but it would still give our young people an opportunity to be outside, to still participate in the league with social distancing as part of that process, but have them active and engaged and be able to relieve that stress and that pressure. And so those are the things that we're working on right now. So if you're interested in that, I will be putting our website as well as phone number in both the Facebook chat and the chat here on Zoom, so that you can get more information about the virtual summer league, summer leadership academy, as well as the summer league that'll be taking place in Anne Arundel County. Thanks.
Thank you. Octavia, in a second, I know you're going to want to, because Darius brushed up against it, to talk about the incidence of sexual abuse in community and some of the sort of deleterious effects that that has psychologically and in every other way that it manifests. I want to shift over to the other story that has pushed the pandemic off the front pages, but don't lose the fact that we're still in pandemic. Don't lose the fact that you will not see spikes, begin to really see spikes until at least 14 days after they have begun to open things up. So don't get comfortable with, oh, they opened things up last week and the numbers stayed steady. Wait another week or two. And that's going to tell us a true story about what's happening and whether it is indeed safer to begin to start loosening things up, or we need to, again, stay home. We would all like to be out, be able to have church in our building and hug and love on each other like we're used to doing it. But it ain't that time, and it's not that kind of party. It is what it is. I want to shift to the unrest that is happening right now around the country. And of course, George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, and yet there are uprisings all around the country. Why is that? Because the same circumstance that he found himself in and the same treatment that he received that took his life from someone he knew, by the way. I don't know if you all knew that or not, but that apparently Floyd and Derek, his last name escapes me, the fired officer who is now detained unless he paid his bail and is out.
Chauvin.
Chauvin, thank you. That they used to work at the same club. Chauvin was at the door as a bouncer and Floyd was on the inside as a bouncer. So they knew each other. And the proprietor of the club used to talk about how Chauvin was very aggressive with customers, with patrons of color, was macing people all the time and whatnot, so that he has difficulties with people of color. And I know I shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna. My fondest wish is that he finds himself in the general population while he's in jail in Minnesota with all the people that he mistreated that are in there. That's all I'm gonna say. But rioting, Dr. King said, is the language of the unheard. And so when you have a population of people that have felt the boot of oppression on their neck now for 4 centuries. Last year, you were hearing a lot about the 1619 Project, because the first stolen Africans arrived on the shores here in the so-called New World. Of course, it wasn't due to the indigenous who had already been here for thousands of years, but be that as it may, that the first stolen Africans arrived here on these shores in 1619. Africans had been here prior to 1619 because some of our ancestors already made it across the Atlantic, and you can see some hieroglyphs and other architecture and things in South America and whatnot with clear African iconography and imagery. So we've been here before, but we came enslaved in 1619. And so here we are now, 400 years later, and the stress of all of that, the genetic psychological day-to-day crap that unfortunately is a part of our journey in these United States. And it's just boiling over. Why is that? What are some of the things that are leading to people feeling the need to speak in the language of the unheard? Now, one thing I want to address very quickly is that a lot of the rioting is not the people who are protesting. The rioting, sometimes they're agitators who just come in, want to take advantage of things, or people who are plants to stir up trouble. There are reports, and I think it was even in Baltimore and other places, that there are some white people who are dressed in black, some of them with backpacks on, walking around with hammers, they have masks on. These are white people running around breaking out windows and things of that nature to make it look like it's us. Are there some of us doing wrong? Absolutely. Is it helpful? Absolutely not. I understand the anger, but what do you think you're accomplishing if you're going to trash a T-Mobile store and take a bunch of cell phones that you won't be able to use because you have to be able to activate the phone? T-Mobile has the code, duh. But anyway, that's not helpful, because what it does is it allows them to change the story. And rather than focusing on one human being having his knee on the neck and carotid of another human being for 8 to 10 minutes and murdering him in broad daylight while it's filmed, and that enables them to take the focus off of that. And then you have the occupant talk about when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Man, sit down and just be quiet. You're not helpful. But that is the change that is happening, that they can focus more on the rioting, the destruction, than on the cause for it. And so while I understand righteous anger, we have to use that intelligently and astutely so that the primary issue and concern is not able to be pushed down and off the front page because they're focusing on others. They would love to focus on anything but what we're talking about and what needs to be talked about. They want to focus on anything but those systemic inequities that came bubbling to the surface because of COVID. It's like, oh my goodness, there are people without housing, or people are losing housing. They're being evicted, or governors or county executives are saying you can't evict anybody now. Okay, but watch and see what happens when those things are lifted. Is there going to be a flood, a torrent of evictions and foreclosures? Housing insecurity is not new. Food insecurity is not new. Healthcare insecurity is not new. All of these things have been existing problems that have now been exposed. And the money people, all they want to do is for things to go back to normal. Back to normal means the status quo, because it was never normal. I want you to hear from two people, very short clips. There was a sister in, I don't know where she was from. She clearly, from listening to her speak, sounds like she's from New York. But I don't know if she was in Minnesota at the time or where, but she brought it. Now, for those of you, I know, and she's pretty good. The person that came after her, he kind of went there a little bit. I don't want to offend your sensibilities for you to clutch the pearls. It's like, oh, that word. The people, I've been around y'all for almost 16 years. Sometimes I was around you when you didn't know you can handle the words. You'll be all right. So I'm going to start with this sister, and then after that, one of our young people who just graduated, I think magna cum laude from Bowie State University, either cum laude or magna, I think cum laude from Bowie State University, and getting ready to go get her MSW, Octavia, at University of Baltimore, Imani Craig, that she did a poem that is powerful. Now I want you first to hear the sister at the press conference. So let me pull that up.
Reason why buildings are burning is because this city, this state would prefer preserving that white nationalism and that white supremacist mindset over arresting, charging, and helping to convict 4 officers who killed a black man. That is the reality of what we're dealing with. This is not just a few cops doing things across the country. country. This is not a good cop versus bad cop situation. This is Ahmaud Arbery being shot down by white men on the streets of Georgia, Breonna Taylor being killed in her home. This is in New York City, where we were until freedom. We were just in New York fighting the police officers who, in the name of social distancing, were damn near killing Black young people on our streets. This is a coordinated activity happening across this nation. And so we are in a state of emergency. Black people are dying in a state of emergency. We cannot look at this as an isolated incident. The reason why buildings are burning are not just for our brother George Floyd. They're burning down because people here in Minnesota are saying to people in New York, to people in California, to people in Memphis, to people all across this nation, enough is enough. And we are not responsible for the mental illness that has been inflicted upon our people by the American government, institutions, and those people who are in positions of power. I don't give a damn if they burn down Target, because Target should be on the streets with us, calling for the justice that our people deserve. Where was AutoZone at the time when Philando Castile was shot in a car, which is what they actually represent? Where were they? So if you are not coming to the people's defense, then don't challenge us when young people and other people who are frustrated and instigated by the people you pay. You are paying instigators to be among our people out there throwing rocks, breaking windows, and burning down buildings. And so young people are responding to that. They are enraged, and there's an easy way to stop it. Arrest the cops. Charge the cops. Charge all the cops. Not just some of them, not just here in Minneapolis. Charge them in every city across America where our people are being murdered. Charge them everywhere. That's the bottom line. Charge the cops. Do your job. Do what you say this country is supposed to be about, the land of the free for all. It has not been free for Black people, and we are tired. Don't talk to us about looting. Y'all are the looters. America has looted Black people. America looted the Native Americans when they first came here. So looting is what you do. We learned it from you. We learned violence from you. We learned violence from you. The violence was what we learned from you. So if you want us to do better, then damn it, you do better.
Let the church say amen.
Amen. She fired it up.
Yes, she did. She told the truth.
She did.
She told the truth. And then there was one more. Again, I said I want you to hear from our daughter, Imani.
Cops put their lives on the line every day. But we do too. The only difference is we're Black and they're blue. They signed up for this. We were just born into it. And they want to say they know how it feels to feel in danger. Well, how many of them have been unarmed underneath with a gun to their head begging, please? Please, I have a future. I have goals of success. Please, I have a family, people who love me and keep me feeling blessed. They still shoot. Because those are the very things they detest. They hate to see us living our life to its potential. So they try to strip us of our hope. Because what's a life with no goals? We have no hope for tomorrow. You don't fight for today. You lose the will to succeed and let your life fade away. Is my life less important because I'm a darker hue? Because my melanin is as potent as my ancestors' screams to be free? I can't live. Because they refuse to see the beauty in me. And in absence of physical change, they try to enslave our brains. They keep saying it's the same race ran, but our race ain't ran the same. We run dodging bullets with shackles around our wrists and chains wrapped around our ankles. And they hate to see it. Because with everything against us, we still make it. They want to destroy us because of how we naturally are. But I love who I am, so I make sure I stay on guard. I wish they could see us as people and not just the color. But because they don't, I fear for the safety of my sisters and my brothers. I fear for the day when they get pulled over and their lives run shorter than the street which they were stopped at. Why are our lives constantly on the line because our youth didn't stop at Pale? Because of that, our ancestors' lives were for sale, fighting for their freedom, with the fear of getting captured and having to live their life in despair. They say they hate us, and they'd rather us dead. But they know how much their lives would differ if we were gone instead. See, even back then, we were worth way more than what they let on. So if they're not controlled, yes, they live in fear, because they know how powerful we really are. And this, please trust. They ain't never been in danger, but they always feel threatened when they see us.
Again, let the church say amen. They ain't never been in danger, but they feel threatened when they see us. And so we're in the midst of a pandemic, and now uprisings springing up around the country in response to murder after murder after murder after murder after murder, etc., of our men and women. Sandra Bland in a traffic stop, Breonna Taylor in bed asleep when the SWAT team broke into the wrong house, a no-knock entry, wrong
15,
house.
15 miles, 15 minutes from the address.
I didn't know it was that far. 15
it wasn't
minutes
even
away.
the same neighborhood. It was not even in the same 15 minutes or 15 miles. Either one, I can't remember exactly, but I know it was 15 minutes or 15 miles.
Either one is way wrong. Is way wrong. And so her boyfriend, who was licensed to have a gun, jumps up and starts shooting. He doesn't know who came through his door, shot one of the officers in the leg. They riddle her with bullets. She's dead. He was in jail for a while until they realized, oh yeah, well, we do have this castle doctrine. He didn't know who they were. They broke in the door. He started shooting, trying to protect himself and his family. They had to let him out, but only after it was elevated and was circulated and became a national issue. So in the same way that they kept him in jail until they were forced to let him go, then you go down to Ahmaud Arbery, that his murderers were walking around the streets for a couple of months until they were forced to put them in jail. Privilege. And so these are the types of things that we go through over and over again. The young lady, Tamika, she in the first video, and I'm sorry, I tried to fill the screen with it, but at least you could hear her. You could hear the power and the truth in her voice. When she talked about Philando Castile, legal gun owner, where Minnesota, pulled over by a police officer. He knew the drill. He'd been pulled over 40 some times. Why? Because he was black, driving while black in America, knew the drill. Informed the officer, by the way, I'm licensed to carry a weapon and I have one in the car with me. Now, common sense would tell you somebody was going to, quote, spring a surprise on you. They wouldn't tell you they had the gun, would they? So then if you are that afraid when you're doing your job, you need to find another job rather than taking somebody's life because you can, and then get away with it. Kill him, murder him in front of his fiance and his children, and he's just dead. NRA didn't say a crickets, okay? Didn't say anything. All about the Second Amendment, but I guess it doesn't apply to people of, as Imani said, darker hue. So into this maelstrom of one person after another, and there's one other thing I have to say. And brothers, I don't know if you all caught this in Georgia with Ahmaud Arbery. Some people said he should have just complied. Now, people say that all the time with respect to law enforcement. I get that. As long as you're not abusing me. If you're abusing me, people, self-defense is back on the table. I'm sorry. This is not the 60s and we shall overcome nonviolent direct action. I'm not saying we should start the violence. We should initiate it with anybody. But if people put their hands on you, spit on you, something like that, oh well. It's not called for. It's not necessary. But these people have the mindset he should have just complied. Complied with who? Two rednecks in a truck that are following you while you're driving, while you're jogging? Really? Comply for what? To whom? Why? But that's the mindset, that if you have brown skin, you should just comply with anybody whose skin is lighter than yours because they said so. It is not that kind of party.
And it's also the law. If you look at what they did in Georgia, and this is why it's so important. I talked to Octavia Brown this morning before the Zoom, and she talked about the importance. Yes, it's important for us to vote in the presidential election, just so we can, as I talked about gargling, be in the habit of voting. But it's ultimately important to vote for the legislative bodies at the city level, the county level, and the state and federal level, because those
the prosecutors and the prosecutors
and the prosecutors. That's right, because these people, there's a systemic process here. The police officers, you have the prosecutors, you have the medical examiners, which, by the way, out of 50 states, I believe they're only Black medical examiners, right? And medical examiners are the ones who did the cause of death, which is such a key component when it comes to police shootings and other things, or deaths that happen while you're in police custody. But then you have the prosecutors, as you said, the judges, and then the wardens, if they go that far, and the correctional officers. And if you look at the Plain View Project and the report that was done there, that study, those numbers, they did a study in 2019 of 5 different major metropolitan police departments throughout the country.
2019.
Dallas, 2019, that's right.
That was last year.
That's last year.
I'm just making that point because of what you're getting ready to tell them. Go ahead.
Dallas and Philadelphia were 2 of those departments. Out of the 5 departments that they studied, found was 20% of the active police officers, meaning on duty, driving around with guns and in cars, and as investigators, detectives, the whole supervisors, the whole 9 yards, 20% of those officers had active racial, social media posts and other inappropriate things regarding sexism, homophobic, you name it, just rifled. Plain view on their social media pages while they're driving around in a police car. In some cases, promoting it while they're driving on the car, on the radio. And then they had another 20% that the day after they retired from those departments, they jumped onto it. So they might not have done it while they were on duty or active police officers, but the day after they retired, they engaged in the same behavior. In Philadelphia, 72 police officers, after it came to the chief's attention, were investigated and fired. In Dallas, they fired police officers there. So what that shows you, if that's the police department, then that means every one of those other professions that I mentioned, those things are also evident. But I want us to think about something. Two quick things I want to share with regard to this. I want us to take control of our own mental health narrative. I want us to take control of that. There's a video out that was in Georgia about 2 years ago where a police officer pulled over two white people. And as a white female, he pulled up on the right side of the car and he asked her to hand me your license and registration. And she said, I'm scared to give it to you because you all, the police, kill people. And he said, no, we don't kill white people, we kill Black people. She said, no. She said, I watched you. You don't kill people. She said, no, I watched you. I seen the video. She said, no. If you ever seen the videos, we don't kill white people. We only kill Black people. So there's a message though there. The message is not just that it happened. They want you to be afraid of the police. They want to instill fear in our being and our body and our mentality, right? So that we will stay basically in place. You will not buck authority. If you think about it, after all of the incidents you just mentioned that happened in the last 3 months, let alone what's been happening over the last 10 years with regard to incidents of violence where unarmed, bounded people have been killed in police custody. The country should already be in flames. Like what's wrong with us that we finally just got mad? And we didn't even, like you said, they showed in Minneapolis, just so you know, the governor and the mayor, the people that they arrested for the damage of property and for the burning were white extremists that were outside of Minnesota, came in Minnesota to start in Minneapolis. It was not the black protesters that got arrested for those things. So they've been doing that. Every time there's an uprising, they go in, destroy property, burn it up, bust out glass, and then leave the scene. And we're the ones looking like we're going in the store and we're stealing and robbing if we're doing that along with the other folks that are doing it. But my point is, we have to really use that critical thinking and understand psychologically, they want us to take on this mentality of being afraid, and not only being afraid, but then devaluing ourselves and our self-worth, where we would even be okay with it continuing to happen. And I'll close on this. He was charged with third-degree murder. Mind you, I watched the video again. He had his hands in his pockets, which was pushing pressure down on his neck. As the man was begging and saying he couldn't breathe, he dug his knee deeper. At that point, it left being first, second, and third degree. It became now first-degree murder because he heard the man couldn't breathe and he continued to press his neck, knee deeper into his neck. My point is, as we see this, we have to decide how we're going to behave as a people, we're going to allow to be acceptable and unacceptable behavior. We're at a point now where we no longer be afraid. Believe in God like we do, then there's no need to be afraid because God is He's with us, He's through us, He is in us. So we got to be able to stand up and say enough is enough. We can no longer take that. We can no longer do that. And we're doing it in our own communities by hints of the version of all of the people that you see on here that are walking and active in our communities to stop crime and killing in our own neighborhoods. So it's not just about white officers killing people. We're in neighborhoods walking with men to make sure this stops happening across the board. In every state, Black men are in the communities walking in the street, working to stop us from killing each other as well.
Thank you for that. A couple of points to make before we ask for other comments. First, the mindset of no value. That, as you said, he dug his knee in deeper, again, on someone that he knew.
While he knew while he was on camera. He knew
while he was on camera. And then to take it another few steps farther, that he had, I think someone was in the conversation was sharing 18 accusations of excessive force. So he has a history, a pattern of doing this in his 19-year career. Apparently his career should have never made it to 19 years, which means that there are however many people he would not have had the opportunity to disrespect and abuse under the color of law. That's what it's called when people are being mistreated while somebody's hiding behind their badge and their uniform. Now, I need to pause here and say that we have law enforcement officers that we pray for, that we love and respect, that have come out of Asbury Broadneck. I have relatives that are police officers or have served in law enforcement in the past. So this is not an anti-police thing, but is an anti-criminal activity under the guise of policing thing. And so when these kinds of things happen and somebody is on 9 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes is a long time to be on your knee on somebody's neck. Just try being on your knee on the concrete or even on a wood floor for 8 to 10 minutes. You're not going to stay there that long.
With all your weight.
With all your weight, intentional and malicious, and and then thought he was going to get away. And then here's the other thing, and then I'll open it up. I learned that I think as people get more and more tired of this kind of thing, they're not saying, let's be mad at all the cops. They're going to be like, where is this cop? And people found out where he lived. And so there were 70 police officers from the county to the suburb to Minneapolis around his house to protect him and his family. His wife is now filed for divorce, by the way. And, you know, I wouldn't be at all surprised if some of the behavior he was exhibiting on the streets, he was exhibiting at home. She'll probably tell that story later. But my question is, so were the 70 of you concerned with the other 17 recorded instances of excessive force that he used? Were the 70 of you concerned when George Floyd lost his life? Were the 70 of you concerned when Philando Castile was shot trying to give the officer the license and registration that he asked for? Where were you then? And why is it now just when you feel that your guy is threatened that you all show up in force? You need to show the heck up in force when these crimes are being committed by your colleagues, so that that can help community differentiate between the criminal cops and the good cops. The good cops outnumber the criminal cops. I believe that. But the criminals are giving all of you all bad press to the point where a number of cities are in flames. And brown people have said, as my grandmother used to say, enough is enough and too much smells. Brown people have had enough. And there are people who are hoping for a race war, trying to foment a race war. Ooh, this is our time. And understand that that's not going to be a good plan for brown people. There are over 300 million guns in circulation in this country in a population of 330 million. And I'm sure that a large majority of those guns are not in our hands. So there are people that are just dying to shoot. You just can't wait to start shooting us. And so that's why critical thinking, as Brother Darius said, and discipline is required, so that we will engage in our righteous anger and protest and shut things down without burning things up in our own neighborhoods. Because y'all are, you know, let's say that this were Annapolis, there's nobody burning anything on West Street. They're burning things over in I don't know, Browns Woods or Mulberry Hill. Well, those are neighborhood communities, or Robinwood or Newtown. They're burning their stuff. They're not burning anybody else's stuff, and the police will make sure you can't get to anybody else's stuff. So why do you want to burn your own stuff? Because the few stores that we have in our communities, you burn them, where are you going to go? In Atlanta, a large number of those businesses are owned by African Americans. You start burning them, you're putting your own people out of business. That is self-destructive behavior. And then, as Brother Darius mentioned, and Moe, you've been trying to be a positive voice in community, and Randy, you know, from disaster preparedness, and Sherita, you know, from working in clinics in the inner city, that there is a negative image of self among our people that allows us to see ourselves as less than, to treat ourselves like trash, to, as Darius, you're talking, just the way we eat, the way we don't take care of ourselves, so that when they come to see you, Dr. Sherita, they're already in bad shape, and now they got a baby on board too, and you're trying to help them. Hope they don't have preeclampsia and those kinds of things. And the fratricide, where young brown men are shooting other young brown men for what I do not know. They're beefing over their hoods. And I'm going to just say this and then I'll stop. So you're beefing over your neighborhood in a situation where your family owns nothing. You are living in public housing. You all don't own it, even if you've lived there for generations, which is never what public housing was intended to be for. But because there's housing insecurity, that's what a lot of folks have to do. I understand that. But it's not anything you own. So then you're going to be beefing with somebody else from another neighborhood in public housing where they don't own anything and the management can come up with something and put you out anytime they want. And so two neighborhoods of people who don't own anything, who don't have a personal financial stake in it, are beefing between hoods and killing our future. When young people like Moe are lying in a casket going to a cemetery instead of receiving their diploma, getting ready to go to grad school, opening up foundations, and trying to be a blessing in our communities. The floor is open.
So I'm gonna step in right there because I used to think like I never really could understand like what was the real reason behind the neighborhood beefing situation. But I started to realize that it was systematic racism that was fueling it, and we just didn't know. So it all started as a young age, you know, you lacking opportunity. So your mom's working, she's trying to juggle the bills, right? Or your mother's a drug addict. So she may sell the food stamps for you. You're 12 years old. So you're not eating right now, you're hungry, and you don't have a father figure in your life. You go outside, you see the neighborhood drug dealer who offers you an opportunity to sell drugs so you can get money and put money into your pocket so you can eat. It's so easy for you to grab onto that opportunity because you're struggling. It's a survival. It's a survival of the fittest out there sometimes. So how I used to look at it was neighborhood beefs, but then I started seeing people in the neighborhood beef with one another. So I was like, whoa, this is not a micro thing. This is a macro thing. So when we look at it, it's like, man, how can you just do that? It's more so you don't know any better. And as we were mentioning earlier, also PTSD, like you're not sensitive to death anymore. You're not sensitive to seeing someone overdose anymore because you see it so much. So you're adapting to that environment and it just becomes within you. So it's like easy for you to go into that same environment and repeat the cycle because that's all you know. You know, a lot of these kids don't get out of their neighborhood. So some people in Baltimore, they don't get out of Baltimore, and some people in the black neighborhood, well, the public housing in Annapolis, they don't get out of Annapolis. So that's all they know. So when you don't know any better, it's easy for you to repeat the cycle and do the same thing. So a lot of my friends, and I'm no saint, I'm not innocent. I played a part in beefs throughout my high school career. So I know what it was like until I got to Broadneck and I was like, you know, I'm ready to go to college. I need to wake up. But for someone who's been struggling in school, your teachers neglect you, the administrators neglect you, you don't have the right therapist or psychologist in school to treat your PTSD. Like it was times I was 7 years old and I saw a dead body and I saw blood one day, and then the next day I had to go to school. But I had a structure, my family was structured because I had my mother and my father. So when it got really bad, I can talk to them, but everybody didn't have that opportunity to have a two-parent household. So it's harder for them to adapt and take advantage of opportunities, especially if no opportunity is in front of them. So if they see it's crazy that like we think about so much, but it's so many like small things that we don't put into place and to see how it fuels it. Like I was telling my friend, I said, man, I met some kids who was 16 and they knew how to shoot a gun, but they didn't know how to tie a tie. You know, so it's certain things that we don't think about because it's so much to put into it. Because this is not something simple that we could fix. You know, this is years and years and years of people getting neglected, systematic racism, oppression. You know, you're fighting so many battles while you're fighting the battle within yourself. So it's easy for you to fall into that black hole. And another thing is that a lot of these kids who are beefing in these neighborhoods, they don't even know how to love themselves. So how can you love someone else if you can't love yourself? You know, and how can I just forgive someone after they just killed my friend? It's so much hate built in within themselves. So it's really hard for them to break that cycle. That's why they need as much help as they can get. And that's why I love the phrase it takes a village, because it really does. Because if I'm not out, I know for a fact, I personally by myself cannot save every kid. But I know that I have the ability to save at least one, you know, and we need more positive people like us to push that on to them, because right now in these neighborhoods, there are more villains than there are heroes. So it's easy for you to look up to that villain. So when the villain's running the neighborhood, it's easy for the neighborhood to continue the cycle because it's the villain's neighborhood. You know, we got. I think that's the thing we don't really look at. It's like how we had to really put ourselves in the middle of that crossfire, not physically. I'm just saying, but like the middle of the bad and the evil right now. Like we can, I mean, the good and the evil, and how we can be the bridge between that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Because right now it's easier to build youth into strong men than to try to fix broken men. You know, I think everybody's always trying to say, how can we fix the whole neighborhood? Well, it's hard to fix it all at one time. So you got to know what to attack. So if I lose a group of 18-year-olds, which is a tragedy that it has to happen like that, some things are forced to happen. If we lose a group of 18-year-olds, but we save a group of 17-year-olds who are eventually going to be grown men, those group of 17-year-olds can now be leaders just like us, and they can save the group of 16-year-olds, who can save the group of 15-year-olds. And now it's more of us who can help everybody instead of us trying to fix just put a Band-Aid on a huge problem, you know, because it's multiple, it's like a pyramid scheme. It's multiple problems that build up to that one major problem.
My. Wow. Thank you for that wisdom. I appreciate that. The victim's neighborhood. The villain's neighborhood. Can't even read my own writing here. Church, and we're going to continue. I just want to say this. We are supposed to be light in the world. The Bible says, let your light shine before men and women, that they will see your good works. They'll see you, they'll feel that you are legitimate, that you have love for them, that you care for them, that you're not there about yourself, but for them. Let your light shine. That is our mission and our assignment, because this thing that we're talking about today is happening all over the country, and congregations have often been content to have a little kind of something program here, there. Okay, so we can say we did something, but that's safe. And then we retreat to our homes and our communities and our buildings. And it continues. It's a new day. In the same way that we are need to demand of our government, you're going to feed people, you're going to house people, people are going to have medical care. In the same way that we're going to engage in the political process and say, you have been over incarcerating African Americans and Latinos forever, district attorney, state's attorney, you're fired, and we vote them out. In the same way that we're focusing on those things, we also have to focus on internal matters, family matters. And we need to come and see about our cousins, help them out. Right now, we know some of the things we need to do. We got to figure some things out to engage our cousins this summer, so that beefs just don't spiral out of control and it's one after another, payback after payback. Close the achievement gap so that it doesn't become a canyon. Address issues of self-love and self-respect so that they can learn to love themselves and then learn how to love somebody else. And they'll glimpse that in part because of what they experience in us, etc.
So I want to actually jump in here, and Brother Moe, thank you so much for those words. You hit the nail right on the head. At the root of everything, the common thread of everything that we're talking about today is institutional racism. And it's imperative that we as a community recognize that that is what is driving all of this. So when we talk about the health disparities, at the root of that is institutional racism. You know, there's racism within the educational system, which is a result of the segregation. And actually, when they look at studies now, there's worse school segregation now than there was in 1954. Let that sink in. In the last 50 years, we really have made very little progress in terms of affirmative action, in terms of civil rights. You know, they want us to think because we had a Black president that we overcame. But in reality, when we look at the numbers, we didn't overcome anything. We are actually in a worse situation than we were at that time. And so there's multi-levels to this situation. there's an individual level where, let's take health, for instance. At an individual level, you have to take care of yourself. You have to optimize your health. So you want to eat healthy, you want to exercise, you want to manage your stress, you want to get enough rest, you want to do things that are healthy for your body. But at the same time, there are all these external forces that are beyond your control that are impacting your ability to do that. And I would say, you talk about next steps going forward. Part of our issue is an education issue. Knowledge is power. So if we understand that the deck is stacked against us health-wise, the deck is stacked against us economically, the deck is stacked against us socially, then we can start to, stop, as you say, Steve, falling for the okie doke. That we know that these institutions into those patterns, we can stop and say, okay, I know that this is trying to, but I'm different. So like Brother Moe's talking about going into the communities and helping to, raise up role models. Similarly, if we understand what's going on with our bodies, those at Broadneck will know, I talked to you guys, I think it was back in February during Heart Health Month, about the importance of knowing your numbers. Oftentimes we don't know basic things about our health, and we have to educate ourselves to be able to combat those things. But then as a community, in recognizing the institutional racism, we have to start trying to influence seats of authority to get some of those things changed. And that's where we seem as a community to get stuck. And that I feel like we've been stuck in this same place 50 years. If you look at the things that Dr. talked about, if teachers, you would think he wrote those yesterday. It is no different. We have not moved from, but recognition, we have such an opportunity now with all of the social media and all of the technology. Brother Darius talked about how, what did you say? You were talking about the fact that we should have been burning a long time ago. And I think what happened is that they keep us in pockets. They keep us so isolated that you didn't necessarily know in Baltimore what was happening in Minneapolis until, maybe a couple days later. But with with this technology, we can see everything firsthand. And so that's how those fires get ignited all over the country at one time, because we can see at one time what's happening. And so, I think that gives us a power and a tool that they didn't have 50 years ago. And maybe that's why we've been stuck all this time. But, COVID has uncovered so many things. Mm-hmm. And not only in our community, just in general in this country, just the way that things are set up in this capitalistic society, it's uncovered so many things that are hurtful to everybody. You can't, they set it up to be rigged against us, but they didn't understand that in hurting us, they were hurting themselves too. Yes. So there is so much, like I said, so many layers to this thing. I'll stop there, but there's a lot.
And when you said that, there's something that I think people miss. It goes over their heads. They're content when we get niggerized, when we get kept over in this corner, but they don't realize that the society in general, regular people, not rich people, obviously, but the society is being niggerized. The whole society is being over-policed. The whole society is being disregarded. The whole society is struggling for health care and food security, et cetera. And they might not realize you're one paycheck away from being in the worst shape you could ever imagine. And some of them are experiencing that now as a result of COVID and not being able to work. So rather than being content with, I remember Jane Elliott, the blue eye, brown eye exercise. She's in her 80s now. She's been doing this for the last 50 years, sometimes facing death threats. A little white woman who ain't scared of nobody and nothing, from Iowa. And she asked a question of one of her audiences. She said to the white people, she said, if the white folks here, if you would be content, if you would be satisfied to be treated the way our Black citizens in this society are treated, I'd like you to stand up now. Of course, nobody moved. She said, no, you didn't understand the question. If you want to be treated, if you're willing to be treated, to accept, if you want to be treated the same way as Black folks get treated in this country, please stand up. Nobody stood up. And she said, so that tells me that you know that there's a problem. And if you know there's a problem, what are you going to do about it? What are you willing to do about it? I got a call from one of our white allies yesterday. What can we do? I said, y'all need to start speaking out. It can't just be us, because if it's just us, well, that's just them complaining. They just need to get over it. But if you all start talking in the same way that whites helped to support the civil rights movement, some white folk died during the civil rights movement, and those things made a difference. I received an email last night from one of my brothers who's a rabbi in the community. And, I had reached out to him when some of the nutcases shot up a synagogue a couple of years ago. He reached out to me. It's like, we stood up on their behalf then. He's trying to stand up for us now, but we need to stand up with and for each other together all the time.
Yeah, where are they?
So that they can't just isolate somebody in a particular place and then just whip up on us in the dark because we're all out in the light together.
I just wanted to ask Dr. Tillett a question, piled on what you just said, Pastor Tillett, and that is, are we able to create a situation? So we understand the victimization with law enforcement and the title, the characterization that Pastor Tillett used, niggerization in that space. But talk about how we were so, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we were so ill prepared from a healthcare system perspective. Take the fact that we didn't know how to deal with COVID off the table, but the fact that Anne Arundel Medical Center did not have masks and hand sanitizer, not a poor, third world country, but the once capital of the United States of America, where the Naval Academy is, they did not even have hand sanitizer, masks to interchange, and the same clothes to go into a room with a COVID-19 person. And normally you'd be changing that whole gown every time you go in. They went the same time over and over and over again. And that impacted everybody all over the country. So we lost people, yes, because we weren't, it was an onslaught, the numbers were high, but we also lost people, am I correct? Because we were
It's a reason for that, Darius, because you can have all the plans you want in the world. As I stated, the pandemic influenza plan for the United States existed for years. But if you don't do exercises and practice and revisit that plan, so no one expected to be in the situation that we're in now because they did not do anything. Preparedness is about practicing. Preparedness is about what do you do in your home if it catches on fire. Fire is the #1 disaster in America. More houses catch on fire than anything, but do we have a plan for how we escape our own homes? So again, a plan without a practice or information is just a plan. And what I like to just add to this has been a very, 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 very inspiring conversation we've had this morning. And the thing that came to my mind was, first word, intergenerational. I mean, I'm very blessed to be an elder at this time of my life. And know that I had an opportunity to be involved in Darius' life, and Darius has the opportunity to be involved in Brother Moe's life, and this is what it's all about. We have members in our church, and that are all different age groups. We need to understand the importance of listening to each other. We need to hear younger folks express themselves and not be so quick to criticize them. They're not in the world that we lived in. I can't imagine what you're dealing with versus what we dealt with. Some of the same issues, but not the same technology. We had to hear from news stations in order to know what's going on. You all are the first line of news. You have your phones, you tell the story. So I think there's a couple of things in this conversation I heard, and that is Octavia talked about mobilizing the community. The other key issue, we got a triple threat going on right now, COVID-19, and then we have the event with the police brutality. And the third thing we have going on is an election year. So these things just add to the distortion of information. The presidents will, candidates will lie, and some will be able to get away with it in ways that we can't imagine. So mobilization is critical. So what we can do is vote and listen to all those entities that are about making sure that the playing field is even for voting, and then vote. And then elders, let's encourage our younger people, our 20-somethings who don't necessarily believe in the power of vote. And I'll just say that because I know that there's enough. Why should I vote? What's going to change? That reality is out there, but we need to encourage them the importance of changing policy. The second policy area is around, again, we elect people who either see police brutality as nothing or as something very, very serious. So I'm hearing Brother Moe talk about reaching kids. We have all of our children will be home this summer with no summer camps. I have there's some folks in my church, I think, Brother Moe, that could help you with your effort to do some tutoring. We have young adults and as well as retired teachers who have taught for years, who could maybe be mobilized to fill that gap that's coming this summer. In 3 weeks, there will be thousands and thousands of young people sitting at home doing what? And so we need to find ways to take what we have. Octavia is trying to mobilize community around police brutality. How can we come together? Reverend Tillett is working closely with ACT, and that's a policy change initiative primarily. But ultimately, they result in services. We have to serve, we have to change policy, and those are the two primary ways that we change any type of health behavior. So if we can take what we have, and I think another key point that Darius makes, despite all that's going on, remember the news is just telling us the deficits. No one is talking about the great work that Moe is doing, the great work that Darius is doing, the great work that Reverend Tillett is doing, the great work that those out is intended to keep us in a deficit mode and a mode of waiting for them to do something for us. We're resilient people. We've always been resilient. So let's talk about how we can help a Moe. Let's talk about how we can help Octavia. Let's talk about how we as elders with our wisdom, but still much more to learn, can be of help in this endeavor to keep our people more healthier and more free, if I might add, in these days and times.
Amen. Amen. We're going to begin to wrap this up. We're grateful for everybody who's joined us on Facebook Live and through Zoom. I appreciate all of you and what you have shared today. I want to point out one thing, Brother Randy, you talked about voting. Voting is a two-step process. Well, three-step process. Number one, you have to register. Number two, you have to actually, four-step process, I'm sorry, register, get educated on who's running and what they're talking about. Party label is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. I don't think that the Democrats are some great panacea and help to us. You know, Exhibit A, a number of people who are now some of the most virulent Republicans were Southern Democrats, you know, a generation ago. And then when LBJ passed Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, they fled the Democratic Party and became Republicans. So party label doesn't mean that much to me. Register to vote, get educated about what the issues are, who the candidates are, vote. And then here's the thing we always forget to do. And then hold the people you elected accountable. They are supposed to be public servants. They work for you. And if they don't do the job you hired them to do, then fire them at the next election and hire somebody else. You receive indifference from elected officials who feel like they have nothing to lose, that nobody's ever going to come for them, that they can get elected to a position and stay in it for a generation, for the next 20, 30 years. No. There's an election every 2 years or every 4 years, depending on what position you're in, or US Senate every 6 years. And if you are not doing the job we hired you to do, if you're not fulfilling the promises that you made, the goals, the highfalutin sounding goals you set up for yourself when you ran, we're going to hold you accountable to it, or we're going to replace you. So that's it. Register, get educated, vote, and then stay active and hold people accountable. If all you do is vote, then you are asleep at the switch yourself. And you're looking for people to do things that you're not forcing them to do. And let
me add one more to that, and that's fundraise. We have to support our politicians financially. We cannot continue to allow them to go to City Hall or to the State House or Congress, and people who do not support our best interests are the ones who are financing the campaigns of our politicians. We have to support our politicians financially and invest in them. $10, $5, $25, whatever it is. And then we also have to, once they get there, we have to support them in action. You know, we have to support, when they make good decisions, we got to write letters to the editor and say, great job. When they do things, you know, social media, we have to actively support them. We can't just get them elected. They're in there fighting against all kinds of powers. They're looking their private lives up. They're attacking them. They're threatening them. They're trying to bribe them and set them up. It is a very ugly process. They need our prayers, and they need our money, and they need our blood, sweat, and tears, our physical capital, our human energy and capital to support the ideas and initiatives and campaigns, and be in our communities, making sure that we're holding up our end of the bargain while they're on the front line fighting, you know, on the podium.
And they need our foot in their behind. That's the other thing you forgot. So there's a software I want you all to be aware of. It is put out by the ACLU. And what it is they call it the Mobile Justice Maryland. And it is in, I think, 18 states around the country. It is in Maryland. You can download this app on your phone. And what happens is that you can just click on the app, tap the app on your phone, and you hit record, and it will immediately begin recording and uploading whatever it is that's going on. The importance of uploading is that it's being reported to the ACLU real time. And if some officer then wants to violate your constitutional rights by taking your phone from you, which they don't have the authority or right to do, and then trying to destroy the phone or take out the card in it or whatever to you know, deprive you of the video that you took, the audio that you took, guess what? It's too late. As I'm recording, it's being uploaded and the ACL is seeing it. I put it on my website. Again, it's Mobile Justice Maryland by the ACLU. It's in 18 states and 17 states in the District of Columbia. Maryland is one of those states. There is a question, and then we'll close this, that was posed by one of our attendees, one of our members. Final thought for today. Can the post-traumatic syndrome be transcended to those of us, I guess maybe transmitted, to those of us who are not direct victims, but feel almost as traumatized as the direct victim? So can PTSD be transmitted to those of us who are not direct victims, but feel almost as traumatized as direct victims? How do we process within ourselves the trauma that happened to someone else? So that will be the last word for today, if you all want to respond to that, and then we will close in prayer, Brother Randy.
I would say absolutely. Absolutely, because we identify, you know, these are still people who look like us. They're people who we identify with. I've seen within some of my physician mother groups, you know, just the agony of talking about George Floyd and how he called out for his mother and just what that did to them, how that made them feel. It put them in the place of his mother. His mother's
dead mother, his deceased mother.
Yeah, I said his mother's deceased, but they felt that pain in a visceral way. The same, you know, when they heard his voice call out for mama, they felt that in a visceral way. So I think in seeing all of this, we, as Black people especially, can identify with it and in a way internalize it, because we know, unfortunately, that it could be our husband, it could be our son at any time. And, you know, that's just heartbreaking. So absolutely, we can take on that PTSD, even if it directly happened to us, because we identify with the victim and, you know, we ourselves recognize our vulnerability.
And in terms of just, thanks for that, Dr. Tillett. In terms of behavior, let's say that person has post-traumatic stress and lives in your home, you're seeing an abnormal way that they deal with life because they're dealing with some post-traumatic stress. So you grow up in that home, and the things they do when something happens, you're a child, you see that happening, you are learning how to live a life of dysfunction. So every behavior that we see and we're exposed to on a continuous basis, if my father beat up my mother, if his or my mother beat up my father, and that's what I see as a child, then that becomes my normal reaction to violence. And so these things are transmitted just by behaviors that take place in our immediate environment. So yes, absolutely yes.
So I'm sorry that Octavia had to get off or to go on another call, because one of the things she was going to talk about was sexual trauma in our communities, because the numbers, the statistics for of sexual abuse of children, girls in particular, but boys as well, are staggering. It boggles the mind how pervasive a problem it is, and then it's generational. And she talked yesterday about there's a law that just got changed at the urging of State's Attorney Mosby in Baltimore and others, where you can now bring up the past history of somebody who's charged with a sexual crime in court. Why wouldn't you be able to bring that up? That shows a pattern. But anyway, and she said that one person who was a repeat offender had been sexually abused himself. Now, that's not an excuse for what he did. It's not a rationale for what he did, but it does show that toxification, that imprinting on our DNA, so to speak, in our psyche, goes from one generation to the next. So I'm sorry she had to go to another call, but that was something that she was going to put on the table. So I just mentioned it in brief. Darius and Moe, and then Randy will pray, please.
So I'm going to talk pretty rapidly, just so I can be brief in my comments, but I definitely want you to take hold of these things, because Octavia and I talked this morning. We live in a rape society. We live in a rape culture.
A rape culture.
A rape culture. We live in a society that promotes, supports, and really, it just promotes and supports rape. I'm going to give a quick example of the Catholic Church, and the fact that the only state in the entire union that has taken the archdiocese to court is Pennsylvania, when in every state in America, as well as almost every country in America where the Catholic Church is, they have cases of rape and molestation of both the children and the nuns, right? Yet there has been, except for in Pennsylvania, very little done with the Catholic Church as an organization, the Vatican itself. Very little done with those people. They were promoted, they were hidden. The priests went from being priests to cardinals to continue to ascend after, reaping this havoc. And so when you think about that, that's just in that particular space. But I wanted to give you a very visual illustration. But in addition to that, in our own communities, in Baltimore City, in the juvenile justice system, 70% of the young men at the Juvenile Justice Center, when I was there in 2010, 11, and 12 doing my research, 70% of them have been abused. These are Black males, 70%. Violence starts at home. And so I want us to understand that we take on that frame of reference. Hurt people hurt people. And so when you have a situation where you never talk about the men who are incarcerated or women who are incarcerated, and they're watching men be raped or other people be raped, children and girls, they watch that. They don't have to do it. They don't have to be the perpetrator or the victim. They can just be a party by actually hearing it. And that trauma in itself, they take that on. Not only that, but we take on trauma from a spiritual perspective. So we need to be able to address this from a spiritual perspective. So one of the things that I want to recommend as a solution as I close is that we've been having, birthday parties virtually and sipping paints virtually and all of that. Let's have some praying parties. Let's have some fasting parties where we're going to get our whole group and we're going to fast beyond Lent, beyond Ramadan, no disrespect to those things, but be able to understand the value of fasting and praying and making sacrifice and taking the names of these institutions and organizations and praying on them that God release that so that we can move and really put some action into our prayers, right? And then the last thing is words have power. And so the words that I want us to use, one is stop using the word white supremacy as a theme, as a symbol, because what it becomes just that, white supremacist. So then you automatically start to take on white supremacy, right? It definitely is a phenomenon, but really what it is white insecurity. It's not white superiority, it's white insecurity. It's their insecurity that makes them have to put people's knee on somebody's neck who's already changed and on the ground. We don't even own property anymore in America like we did back in the, Dr. Tillett talked about, you know, in terms of segregation is worse now than it was then. We own less property now than we did 50 years ago, but we have more wealth, right? And so when you look at
we have more income. There's a difference between income and wealth.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Iron sharpens iron. But we do. We've got to be able to recognize that we got to change that verbiage and call it what it is, white insecurity. And the other word I want us to use, when we see clear examples of police brutality and white people who take on the responsibility and Black people who take on the responsibility with a badge, and like those people who call themselves making a citizen's arrest, when the state of Georgia has like 4 different laws. They have the open carry, they've got citizen's arrest, they've got, what's the law, stand your ground, but they don't have a hate crime. Those policies are set up so that they can do exactly what they did, right? So we have to be able to use words that actually speak to what it is that they're doing, which is terrorism. So start referring to the guy who put his knee on it, Derek Chauvin, as a terrorist. Because when the secretary, or not the secretary, but the former Eric Holder, Attorney General, did his study in his first 6 months, what he found was terrorists in the United States are not coming from outside the United States. The terrorism in the United States is coming from militias right here in the United States of America. So we have to call it what it is. So start labeling it properly and start calling it properly. So not white supremacy anymore, white insecurity. And
white fictionalism.
Or white fictionalism, and call it what it is, domestic terrorism, because that's what they are, domestic terrorism. Thank you all for the opportunity. God bless you. Peace and love.
God bless.
Mo, anything else? Last word from you?
I just want to thank you all for letting me be a part of this. You know, I think one of the most important things that we have to focus on is rebuilding that gap that we have, the generational gap. So, you know, it's not every day that youth, and I'm not gonna call y'all old, but
yeah,
you're older. It's okay.
It's not every day that we all can connect, and you know. And I think this is a new type of revolution where we all are connected and we're all in unison now. So when we all in unison, nobody can stop us. I'm trying to tell you, this is serious right now. And I'm looking at it every day and I'm like, wow, like people are really waking up. People are really, they're getting out their comfort zone. They're not timid anymore. They're not gonna just sit down and keep getting told what to do. It's different now. So I think we need more webinars like this, you know, every week or every other week, you know, keep us all involved, keep us all motivated, you know. Like this is amazing. I love to see stuff like this, especially from my generation where we didn't see too much like this. We only heard stories about Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Farrakhan, Marcus Garvey. I can go on all day about it, but now to see that me and my generation are now making a new history, it's like, wow, this is real life, and let's keep it going.
Yeah.
Mo, you said something I wanted to ask you real quick. You, which was very prophetic. You said that, you know, our young people see villains in the neighborhood. I believe that was the word used, villain, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
villain, he called it the villain's neighborhood. He's like, the villain runs the neighborhood.
Right. So if we would call it, so right now we're seeing the villain's neighborhood. What would you call the opposite? What would you call it? Would it be the leader neighborhood? Would you be called a coach neighborhood? I don't use the word mentor because mentor comes from the Greek mythology. And during that time, they allowed the Greek scholars to molest the boys, as
I knew
that
that
was
was
what
coming.
mentoring. That's where mentoring comes from. So I don't use the word mentoring. I use coaching or some other form. Words have power to me. But what would you use?
If there's more heroes,
Hero community.
it's funny that I would probably say the Kings and Queens neighborhood, because that's what we
Okay.
are.
Okay,
Oh,
there you go.
We sometimes forget that. So, you know, and I think it's great that all of us emphasize that on the youth, because they don't, when you don't know your history and you don't know where you come from after your ancestors been taken away from their history and whitewashed 400 years, you don't know any better. You know, you think that Christopher Columbus was the first person to sail over to America, when in reality, Mansa Musa, his tribe came over here 100 years before him. So when you don't know about your history and your past history, where you come from, where your name comes from, where your culture originated from, you don't know about yourself. So you're lost. So when we have the opportunity to help a kid find themselves, even adults, because there are a lot of lost adults right now, and I've witnessed it. And I'm hoping that we can help.
1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
But when you find yourself, I'm trying to tell you, you're a different person. Me 4 years ago compared to me now is a totally different person. And I know that I had not the greatest path, but like my future is bright, and I want everybody to feel that way about their future, because it's not, a lot of people used to try to tell me when I was younger and I was learning about myself that I was conceited, and I was explaining to them, I'm not conceited, I'm convinced now. I know what I am and who I'm supposed to be.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
Praise the Lord. Let's just take a moment just to praise the Lord for all of this, and even the listeners who are gathering all this information. Let's just take a second and meditate our minds to praise the Lord and thank Him for putting this on Reverend Tillet's heart, that this kind of conversation was necessary. Let me read this before you. If I send pestilence among my people, disease, infections, violence, my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. Hear this part. Then I will hear from heaven, will forgive their sin and heal the land. So, Father, we are here I'm thankful, Father, that you have allowed those of us on this line to live to be elders in our community and to understand the true meaning of that special status that you have given us, because we only get there if we're allowed to live that long. So, Father, I thank you for allowing me to live to hear the voices of the young, the old, the in-between, that we might come to one conclusion, that we are together more important than we are apart, that we together can heal the land, that we, through our spiritual healing, through our understanding that everyone has a different pathway, that everyone has a different walk in life, but we are all one in Christ, Father, that we are all one in the Creator, Father. So, Father, let us, this information that we've heard today, let us meditate on it, let us sink in. But after we've done all that, Father, let us do some self-reflection and ask ourselves, what can I do to make a difference? How can I not just have faith, but have faith that's in action, Father? So, Father, when we leave this call, let someone decide to help one of these causes, to be part of each other, to heal the land, Father, as you have declared us to be. Guide us and keep us, protect us in these difficult times. Have us to do things that will change the world, Father, that will make the world the way that you see it, Father, the way that we should be. Thank you all. Thank the panelists. Thank the pastor. Thank those who just took the time to listen and stay here. But more importantly, Father, let us follow you and follow Jesus so that we might be better Christians and a church community that's doing something to make a difference. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Before you all sign off, Brother Darius just reminded me, and we've received a chat message from Sister Kia there is a boycott that is being requested across America from African American communities and our allies on the 7th of July, where we would on that day show our economic power by not spending any of it anywhere. The African American community has a net worth or net income, I'll say, of several $1 trillion a year. And so if we were to stop spending for a day or several days or a week, we saw the power of the bus boycott in Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, that launched Dr. King's career and really propelled the civil rights movement, that it can make a difference. So that's the 7th of July. But then Brother Darius is saying, start now by stopping spending money with companies that support the prison industrial complex.
Who are they?
So we want to encourage you to think about that and to make a statement with how you spend your money and where you spend your money and how you don't spend it and where and when you don't spend it. So that's the day, the actual day of the blackout is the 7th of July, but you don't have to, you can start and continue after. Those are some of the things we are talking about doing to just let folk know that we know. God bless you all. Thank you. Everybody be safe. Please stay inside. It's not over yet. It'll be over after a while. Trust God and stay in with your people in the meantime. Everybody be safe.
Amen.
All right.